So I don't like Maniac mode, but I do think it's interesting and underexplored, and I just finished playing Iron Man on stream, so let's talk about it. Maniac is a Japan-only difficulty setting in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. For reasons we can only speculate, it was taken out of our localized version and it was replaced with an easy mode. Important differences between Hard and Maniac include slower experience gain, reduced bonus experience, more enemies, stronger enemies, more 1-to range on enemies, and more 3-to 10 range on enemies. Path of Radiance is known as one of the easiest entries in the franchise, and the common fan perception of Maniac is that it doesn't really make the game more challenging as much as it just makes it more annoying, and this is actually a take that I disagree with, partially. Maniac is definitely more difficult. After playing it, I would say it's about as, if not more challenging than Hector Hard mode, which is still not nearly as hard as something like the Lunatic mode from later games like FE12, Awakening, and Fates. But if you're just expecting the dead easy English hard mode but with less fun allowed, you're in for a treat. To be fair, the first half of the game is almost exactly like that. Titania is really good and everyone else is somewhere between mediocre and bad. The most noticeable change for me was the slowdown on experience gain. If you compare Maniac to Hard, there is a flat -5 reduction on EXP gain per kill. Now, you could argue that this is made up for by Maniac mode just having more enemies, but I think this just results in the rich getting richer. A lot of units are not able to get more than 1 or 2 kills per turn because they're just too underleveled or too fragile. So if you're under a lot of pressure, you're going to use your best units to fight most of the enemies and then feed the scraps to your training projects. So those training projects aren't really growing any faster in a setting with more enemies. Unless of course you just slow down and take more turns to feed them, but that has another drawback: you lose bonus experience. Broadly speaking, Path of Radiance hands out bonus experience for 3 different things. The first is turns, how fast you cleared it. If you clear within the limit, you get the maximum bonus experience, and for every turn you take extra, it subtracts a little bit. Then sometimes a chapter has side objectives, like the stealth bonus for chapter 10, or leaving the vigilantes alive in chapter 11, or leaving enemy Lagoos alive in chapter 15. And finally there is the clear bonus for every chapter starting with chapter 10, which is given out regardless of what you did or didn't do within a chapter. Except on Maniac, Maniac just doesn't give out the clear bonus at all, which means BEXP is a lot more scarce. This is incorrectly stated on Serenus Forest and the Fire Emblem wiki, and those sites should be changed. Is what I would say if I hadn't replayed the first bit of Path of Radiance on hard mode again just to check this. And no, the clear bonus is not there on hard mode at all, just like Serenus Forest says. Serenus Forest is right. I do recall someone in my chat said that the clear bonus being absent is a Maniac mode thing, but as far as I've been able to check, that is not the case. You do get roughly half of what you would get on hard mode for turns and side objectives, and that is the significant cut that you really start to feel if you're used to the generous amount that you get on hard mode. On top of that, completing chapters quickly in Maniac mode is harder than in hard mode, due to the greater quantity and quality of enemies, and your units are getting less kill experience in the first place. As mentioned earlier, I don't think killing more enemies total makes up for this, because a large amount of enemies usually make things unsafe for unleveled units, so only units that are already good at surviving can reap these rewards and snowball. The unfortunate side effect of this is that you're making units that need favoritism worse and units that start out good better, so like I said, the rich get richer. I guess it makes Marcia and Jill a bit worse because they need favoritism to get going, while Titania is like the best unit ever. In hard mode, I think Titania versus Marcia is a close contest, and in Maniac, I think Titania is just by far the better unit. That sums up roughly the first half or so. It's just hard mode but a little more annoying. And if that's all you played, then I can forgive you for thinking that this is just a very uninteresting and boring difficulty. So let's talk about what happens in Maniac after chapter 17. Imagine you've just left the long Serenus Forest arc, your Ike just promoted, you got Raisin, you got Tanith, and you might think you're good to go for the next chapter, but you go into chapter 18 and holy god, that is a lot of long range tomes. Holy fuck, why is there so much long range? That's not a chapter 18 thing, these are everywhere, there are so many of them, it's a plague. From this point onwards, if a map doesn't have a Blizzard Sage, a Bolting Sage, and a Meteor Sage, you accidentally load up your hard mode save. Well, there's some exceptions, but generally this is everywhere. And you're just not gonna see unpromoted enemies anymore. Everything is promoted, and almost everything that can have a 1-2 range weapon, like a javelin or a spear or a bow, is going to have one. So your enemy phase offense is going way the fuck down. Even good units like Kieran and Oscar, even units that are known to be good at offense like Boyd, are going to fail more often at one-running on enemy phase, especially with 1-2 range. And that's if they're even safe to try it, given just how much long-range magic is in the air. The biggest pains at this point, besides that long-range magic, are paladins. Enemy paladins in Path of Radiance are so annoying. They can have any of the 4 main weapon types, so you are probably not going to have weapon triangle advantage against all of them like you can sometimes do in the older games. In addition, their stat layout seems tailor-made to make them hard to kill. They have enough speed that units that aren't extremely fast cannot double them. Like, they range from 20 to 24 in chapters 18 and endgame and in between, and most units in Path of Radiance cannot ever hope to double that. Then they have so much bulk that even 2-hit KOing them is difficult, and on top of that, they're paladins. They have all that movement and the ability to move again after attacking to make them extra annoying. And it is annoying, it really is. This shit was absolutely not playtested, and I get why they removed this mode from the game. But there are a pair of things that make this fun to play anyway. So let me present those in order from least to most exciting. Don't you love lists? Number 1 are Tanith's Holy Guard reinforcements. The Holy Guard somehow gets buffed on Maniac mode. Or maybe just the Japanese version, but I think it's Maniac mode. Tanith summons 2 Pegasus Knights and 1 Falcon Knights, and they have capped speed, and especially the Falcon Knight is just really strong with the Silver Lance. These guys have saved my ass more times than I can count. I found them most effective when set on roam, since they like to pick off weakened enemies, and they can even soak up multiple hits from enemies to make my life easier for actual blue units. Especially those stupid long-range tomes. Sometimes they get lucky and slip through the cracks in order to even take out an enemy sage before I can get there. And the most annoying thing about the Holy Guard is you can only give him directions if Ike hasn't moved yet, which I forgot to do all the time. I was like, oh, I want to move my Holy Guard here. Oh, I already moved Ike. Never mind then. Radiant Dawn thankfully fixed this by allowing you to give direct commands after your main character has already moved, but in Path of Radiance, I accidentally left them on the same settings last turn way too many times. Still, these boys and girls are awesome, and I felt bad every time one died. You can only summon 3 of these 2 times total per chapter, but that is enough to make Tanith worth deploying in every map. Tanith herself is honestly not good enough at surviving or killing things to warrant getting into combat without a bunch of favoritism, which, as I discussed, is more scarce than ever. Which feels outrageous to say because she's supposed to be a pre-promote and a competent pre-promote at that. Like, her stats are supposed to be good. They're not good enough, but the Holy Guard is just so nice that I would never leave her out of my roster after she joins. Now at number 2, we have Crit Forges. The Japanese version has a wonderful glitch in the forge system. If you try to forge a weapon that already has 5 crit on it, like the Slim Sword, the Slim Lance, or a Thunder Tome, you can try reducing the crit rate to 0. But since the crit rate is changed in increments of 3, the game will try to change the crit rate to -1, which then underflows into 255. This gives your weapon a guaranteed critical, and because it's often a slim weapon, it's also very accurate. Not to mention you can still forge might onto it to make it more powerful. Now, when I initially started playing and I knew about this glitch, I was like, I'm just gonna make 1 crit forge, just 1 to see how it feels, and then we never make 1 again. Then I learned how expensive these are, and like, holy moly, these cost bank. You don't have the money for this. See, in a Japanese version, the base cost for forges is twice as high as the English version, and crit forges are expensive. For some reason, forging crit just costs so much money in this game, even though when you're not exploring a glitch, this is a shitty option, it sucks. Tomes are especially costly. To get a max might Thunder Forge with 255 crit, you have to pay almost 15k. That's about 7 times as much money as you even have in the early game when you first get access to the forge. Even a Slim Lance, which is the cheapest crit forge, costs almost 13k. Don't even get me started on the Slim Sword, which for some reason costs 19k for max crit and max might. I think if you watched like a speedrun of the Japanese version, you might think the crit forge cost is trivial because the route makes so many of them, but the cost is very prohibitive. The only reason runners are able to afford these is because they play on a cleared save file, which gives you a bunch of these growth boosting accessories like the fighter band and the myrmidon band and the paladin band and so on. Those can be sold for 2k gold each, which covers a lot more than what the game initially gives you. You know, when I said at first I was going to make one crit forge, I was like, oh, I'll just do that once and then I'll just have some fun with it and the rest of the game will be played legit. But then I realized just how costly they were, and I thought, well, that will make it very easy to stick to that self-imposed challenge. I'm not normally someone who exploits glitches in Fire Emblem. I'm like someone who likes to color inside the lines. If it's clearly not developer intended and it breaks the game in such an obvious manner, then I don't like to use it. But I got hooked. I had so much fun with these that when I was able to afford it, I made more. And given how clearly unplay tested this difficulty is, and how much less tedious it makes the game to crit every attack, I have no regrets. However, since I was not playing with all these free bands, I was very limited on cash, so this actually made the economy of Path of Radiance interesting, which I didn't think was possible. You do get 20k very early on in the game, but that's most of the money you're going to have between chapter 8 and 20 or so. So what I ended up doing a lot of the time is make my crit forges without maxing out their might. This kind of sucked because every point of might is worth 3 damage per crit, but it made them a lot more affordable, and a lot of the time they would still kill or do significant damage without the extra might. And sometimes I was able to afford max might once and it kicked absolute ass. But they don't trivialize the game at all, because they're so weak at base, except for Thunder Forges, those do break the game. If you have a sage like Soren or Ileana, and you get them to a threshold where they're 3-hit killing enemies, and then they crit, and you give them advantage so they always attack first, always, even at full HP, every enemy phase, they're invincible and they kill everything. I have to highlight how insane it is that it is so easy to make a sage one round KO and never die. Most units struggle to survive or kill, let alone doing both, and crit forges with Vantage just do that. They treat Maniac mode like they're an Awakening and they're fake, or Robin I guess. The only reason my Soren died is because of a Swordmaster in Clash. Soren missed him with his Vantage attack, and then because my Soren was speed screwed, he got quadrupled and died. I was so sad. Thunder Forges are a bit expensive, but because Soren's magic was so good, I could afford to forge little to no might onto them, and that made Soren cheaper than the Lance users in a way, also because he was one-shotting instead of two-shotting with a crit. Of course, on top of the money problems, you also only have one forge per chapter, and they do break somewhat quickly if you use them at every opportunity, so that's why I'm saying that they help and make the game more fun, but they can't do everything. So I'm sure that throughout this video you got a good idea of what units I was using this playthrough, perhaps from what I'm saying, perhaps from the footage alone. But the way Maniac mode warped my perception of some of these I think is worth highlighting. In the future I want to do a tier list of Maniac mode and see how it compares to hard mode, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this video right now. So for now I will say that there were a couple units that surprised me both positively and negatively. I already gave a shout out to Soren, the murder machine, and I also really enjoyed Guthrie this playthrough. I gave him the boots and Provoke, and he ended up being the most important in keeping enemies distracted. He gave me a new respect for Provoke that, I think, hot take, it might just be the best skill in FE9. At least it's at this point I think the most underrated skill in the series. I also had a blast using Bastion to try and proc corrosion on enemies after Soren died. I grinded Rolf from base to promote level 10 or something in the span of one chapter, and I had a great time watching Jill and Oscar fail extremely hard when they first joined, and constantly gave him crap for their supposed S/A tier status, only for them to turn around and become two of the most reliable units near the end. But again, more about the unit specifically in another video. Let's wrap this whole thing up for now. Would I recommend playing Maniac mode? Not really. I think this is a mode you play if you really love Path of Radiance, which I do, or you just have a morbid curiosity about like bad game difficulty or bad game design, or all these. Personally, I played it just because it was something I hadn't done before, only witnessed from a safe distance, and I kind of enjoyed myself. But part of that is because I'm streaming it, so while an enemy phase is playing out, I can just talk to chat and have a good time. Legit though, I do think Maniac is more intense than a lot of people give it credit for. It's definitely a huge step up from hard mode. A low bar to clear, I know, but since FE9 is overall one of the easiest in the series. But legitimately, between the stupid FE9 enemy paladins and the absurd amount of long-range threats, there were quite a few enemy phases where I wasn't sure if my units were going to make it through alive, and a lot of the units didn't make it through alive. And there were also a lot of player phases where I was struggling to figure out what the safest move was, and ended up making not safe moves. That said, I was playing an Iron Man, which I imagine is not what most people would do, although I will say that Iron Man playthroughs are a lot of fun, and if you haven't tried one already, you should. Even if it isn't in Path of Radiance. But for Maniac, usually I recommend trying everything once. Unfortunately, the actual challenging part of Maniac mode is locked behind like 20 maps of slightly more annoying than hard mode, because only after Serenus Forest does the game really ramp up. And it's not unlikely that if you get through that, then your reward is map design that is still likely to annoy you. It might also challenge you, but it's certain to annoy you. I didn't make this video to wholeheartedly recommend Maniac mode, I think that would be unethical to do. But I do think it is interesting from an analysis standpoint. There were a couple of misconceptions about it that I wanted to correct, like the clear bonus being removed being a hard and Maniac thing, not a Maniac thing, and the fact that it's not just tedious, but also legit hard at times. So, for the three of you out there that watched to the end that I know enjoy Maniac, and for the sane among you, let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you next time.